Well, Prime Minister in waiting Andy Burnham has said there may be room for manoeuvre when it comes to new tax changes. He's drawing up plans to increase public spending on council housing, infrastructure and defence, but promising not to increase the main rates of income tax, VAT or national insurance, which are, of course, key pledges in Labour's manifesto. In a moment, I'm going to be speaking to Emily Darlington, Labour MP for Milton Keynes and former Special Advisor to the Chancellor under the previous Labour government. But let's get a little recap now with Ollie Cole, who's Times Radio's newsroom reporter, who's here in studio with me. Ollie, what are Andy Burnham's options, really?
Well, we know that he is hemmed in basically by that manifesto pledge. You know, there is a big thing that Andy Burnham has to do if he wants to look like a legitimate leader of the country. You know, there's been these calls from the opposition for a general election, that sort of thing. But actually, Andy Burnham needs to try and stick as much as he can to the Labour manifesto in order to make that valid. And last night, he said that, you know, pretty much bang on the whole, three big pitches, which, you know, whether you think they were a good idea or not a good idea, they were in that manifesto pledge. So if you look at income tax, three big taxes he can't do anything about. But he has very, very strongly gone after business rates, and I think that is something that he's very determined to push through quite early on, looking at actually reducing rates on hospitality businesses, about a 20% cut in some places for pubs and bars and things like that. And also raising the thresholds on some other small and medium-sized businesses in our sort of town centres and high streets, so that that'd be the first move, I think, since about 2017 that's happened. So, you know, that would be quite a big change for them. And then he's got this question of how do you fund it? His target seems to be, if you drive up and down a motorway anywhere in England, you'll see these huge, gargantuan warehouses, you know, owned by Amazon, these big, online retailers up and down the country, these huge, often sort of massive blue warehouse buildings, and those areas and those places are where he wants to go after to raise the money in order to be able to give a bit of breathing space, as he puts it, to businesses. There's also talk of, you know, whether he fancies some moves on capital gains tax, things like that. We know that he doesn't really think that council tax and stamp duty are working at the moment, but I think there's a big question there over, you know, at the moment, every sort of possibility of reforming council tax and stamp duty has quite big political payoffs and quite big sort of political problems that you're going to have to upset one group of people or another. So he's really got to think about that one. But he's pretty clear that those three pledges in the manifesto stand, and, you know, he is dealing with a very, very tight fiscal envelope. We think probably the headroom that Rachel Reeves talked about has got a little bit smaller since she actually, you know, announced it back in the spring. So he's got a sort of small margin here, but he wants to reprioritise where he's looking for tax rises to make sure that they're sort of business burden rather than a personal burden.
Well, stay there if you wouldn't mind, Ollie. I'm just going to bring in Emily Darlington now, Labour MP for Milton Keynes, former Special Advisor to the Chancellor. Good afternoon, Emily.
Good afternoon, Cathy.
I just wanted to put the same question that I just asked to Ollie to you, if you don't mind, about how much room for manoeuvre you think that Andy Burnham really has.
There isn't much room for manoeuvre, but there is room for choices, and to govern is to choose. And so we have a very old-fashioned way of doing taxes built on what used to be the structures, when in fact, when you look at something like business rates, that really hasn't kept up. The pressure on high streets, because people aren't shopping as much on their high street, it gets even more and more difficult then to have those vibrant high streets, those small businesses, those mum and pop shops, because of the big online retail space, which is being funded by relatively low business rates on these huge warehouses.
So, and you're obviously talking about the first proposal that Ollie mentioned about cutting business rates and using and funding that from these an extra levy on these big online warehouses. What do you make of the second area that Ollie was talking about, equalising capital gains tax with income tax? Is that a fair option, do you think, or is that going to just lead to a flight of rich individuals and capital potentially?
Well, there was a really active discussion when both Andy and I were at the Treasury, actually, when we equalised both rates of capital gains, and quite a lively discussion that would help stop people avoiding paying capital gains. But the reality is it didn't. So I'm not speaking here for Andy, I'm speaking for myself. I think we really need to look at what's productive capital, what's unproductive capital. So when you have things like second homes and race courses and pieces of art having a lower rate of tax than investing in a business, investing in stocks. I think you really do have to make a decision about, is that right? And are people putting money through racehorses and pieces of art rather than paying income tax because it's a lower rate? And actually, we do need to find a way that there isn't a loophole in that.
But do you think there's really room for manoeuvre, for basically to increase an already record high tax burden still further, given some market scepticism about Andy Burnham, his comments that he doesn't want to be in hock to the bond markets? That did cast quite a long shadow, didn't it? Do you think he has got the room for manoeuvre in that sense?
Well, everybody wants to cut taxes when they're in government, and I'm sure Andy does as well, just as everybody in the Labour Party does. But ultimately, we do have some really big bills to pay for and public services to rebuild. We have to invest in defence. We're going to have to find ways of fairly funding those defence things. But we also have public services that are only starting to get off their knees with the additional investment that's been put in over the last 2 years. So we can't put the NHS back into a situation where waiting lists are going up and up. We're actually seeing waiting lists come down, and that's got to continue because you need all of these things contribute to a healthy economy. You have to have a healthy population, support for people getting into work, and defence of the nation. And unfortunately, that's going to cost money. So you've got to make the fairest decisions that you can when you're doing that.
Come back to defence in just a second, but just to push you a little bit further on, raising the tax burden still higher, is that really the way to stimulate a healthy economy, to use your words?
It depends what you're stimulating. So if you're doing something to revitalise our high streets, which is something that is much, much more than just an economic, it's where a town comes together. It's where that community cohesion happens. And we've seen that community cohesion and that division within communities get stronger and stronger. It's also where many businesses have their very first shop, and then they grow and hopefully have another outlet and another outlet and another outlet. We grow these British winners on our high streets. They've been neglected for way too long, and part of the burden that they'll always tell you is about business rates, and they're undercut by these online retailers who have much, much lower business rates, and that isn't really fair.
Do you think Ed Miliband shares this vision? Do you think he'd make a good chancellor despite the scepticism in some quarters?
I don't know. I mean, it's going to be completely up to Andy who he chooses to be as Chancellor. What I do know of Andy is he's a real team player. So I think no matter who is Chancellor, they'll be talking and working with everybody across the cabinet, across government, and I hope within the Parliamentary Labour Party.
OK, just moving on a little bit more broadly. The number 10 in the North, is it a good idea? Is it doable? Is it really going to make a difference?
I think it is doable. I think we are, and we very much see a London bias within government. We've seen that for quite some time. I think in some ways it's a bit symbolic, because why Manchester and not Liverpool or Milton Keynes? But the reality is to get people's mindset that not everything that happens in this country happens in London. And in fact, if we want to see the housing growth, if we want to see the economic growth, if we want to see new public services, those are likely to happen outside of the London area. And if you've got a civil service that's so focused, living in London, working in London, they'll fail to understand that actually there's a whole country where the majority of us live that isn't London and is different.
I love your picture of number 10 in Milton Keynes there. Nice try.
Exactly. Anytime.
But let me just pick you up on your suggestion of London bias, because if you look at the figures, the Times had this very interesting piece today talking about the London South East paying respectively £48 billion and £15 billion more in taxes than the residents of those two regions receive in spending. So every other region is running a net deficit. So if you look at those figures, the North is already being heavily subsidised, isn't it? Far from being neglected by Whitehall.
Yeah, but not because it wants to be, because it's not as economically vibrant as London is. And when you say the southeast, there are huge pockets of deprivation in the southeast, or areas that get neglected. Milton Keynes is in the middle of the Oxford to Cambridge corridor, but people forget that actually there's a huge amount that could, if it was getting the same support as London or Oxford or Cambridge, could do much, much more for economic growth. They're not asking for this additional money. It is how we're rebalancing at the moment. And wouldn't it be better to rebalance by them being able to pay a bigger share of tax because of their success?
Right. OK, one other question to you. The German basic law, do you understand it? Is it practicable in the UK? I mean, it's related to this point, obviously, that we've been discussing, but what do you understand by it?
Well, I think it's quite complicated, but what I do understand, what really attracts me about some of the German model is this energy diffusion. We rely solely on one national grid. In Germany, they have these sort of provinces where they have their own energy sources. It's closer to home. It's more secure. It's more sovereign. And so if you're looking at models like that we can do in terms of skills, that we can do in terms of water, we can do in terms of economic growth, USP and specialisms and different things, advanced manufacturing or life sciences or whatever it might be for different regions, then that gets very exciting.
Oh, you've gone a bit distant, Emily, but I'm going to just
Apologies.
ask... OK, you're coming back now. I mean, I thought it was all about sort of sharing out resources, though, rather than talking about devolution of utilities.
I think it's about both, isn't it? It's about empowering from the bottom up, where you get a specialism, so everybody has their own thing that they can share, and then coming together when you need to as well.
All right. Emily Darlington, thanks very much for putting us in the picture on that. We'll see what happens and we'll come back to you.
Cathy.
Ollie is still in the studio here. I just want to come back to you on what we were hearing about there from Emily about the Chancellor. And, obviously it'll be Andy Burnham's pick, of course. A lot of talk about Ed Miliband being the runaway favourite. What are you hearing? What's the latest?
Well, I thought what was interesting, what Andy Burnham said last night, was actually he admitted he'd not actually made that choice yet, which I think some people, given he's potentially 3 weeks out from being in Downing Street, would find quite remarkable. There's
if
obviously,
true, of course.
Well, if true, quite. But there is... I think a prevailing wind behind Ed Miliband. I think the question a lot of people are asking themselves is, OK, well, if not Ed Miliband, who else?
There's a lot of Wes Streeting fans.
There are a lot of,
a few.
But they're not really on the left of the Labour Party, which is, still one camp that could potentially try and field a candidate against, Andy Burnham in the upcoming contest to try and move the dial a little bit if they get wind of that. What's interesting is we know that Andy Burnham, some of his team have started meetings with people in the city to try and reassure them on a few economic plans. We know also that Andy Burnham said last night that actually, the political direction, as he put it, is not up for discussion. And I found that really interesting because it showed that even if Ed Miliband, he's got this brand because he has lost to the general election, he has, been behind the net zero push, that actually he's been sort of a bit frivolous with the finances perhaps, but actually he has been in the Treasury, Andy Burnham's been in the Treasury, and he has asserted pretty much, Andy Burnham, that whoever he's going to put in number 11 will have to sign up to his ideas wholesale and not go off freelancing. So it is interesting. I think there's still a little bit of chatter coming out of Downing Street about Pat McFadden playing a role in the Treasury somewhere. Whether that is a case of them trying to still keep a bit of Starmerism alive on Whitehall or a real thing, we don't know. But there's definitely a lot of people pitching for it. How many people will be successful will be the next thing.
Yeah, exactly. It's interesting though. I mean, obviously Andy Burnham has learnt from his years in the Blair Brown regime, and just the tensions between that and how he and the Chancellor have got to be absolutely on the same page. Ollie, thanks very much for that briefing. Thanks for hanging around. And thank you to Emily Darlington a little bit earlier.